both got our water.
Are you a coffee drinker?
Tea mainly. And we're live,
All right.
Dismal and I, for the second time. We've spoken before, and I'm very happy to welcome you again. Um, Dismal is a compelling storyteller, and
Second
you
time, but first time on Koraniyule, so
yes,
it is a
yes.
first.
Well, I try to really, when I have a guest on, I should be more into listening to their thing rather than concentrating on telling them what to think. So I this is a season for generosity and patience and everything. But since you are such a compelling storyteller, it's not hard at all. Um, what sort of job can a compelling storyteller get other than a YouTube channel?
Cleaning toilets for the most part in today's day and age. Cleaning
But you,
toilets and whatever else.
yeah, but I mean, there are obviously some
I've never had
people.
much luck in the job market. It's never been very kind to me.
Well, possibly because you have your own view about things, and you have a compulsion to um, speak your mind, as I do, I suppose. And I suppose at some stage it becomes a compulsion, and you're not gonna, go along to get along after all you've said and done for so long, and blah blah. Do you keep a diary?
YouTube is my diary. I always tell myself that my channel is sort of like it's either something like a diary or a time capsule, like something I want to look back on, or maybe like future people. No, I'm sure no one will care, but I tell myself, people in the future will, when
Do
wanting to
you?
know about the times and what it was like, my channel can be a good resource for potential future people to look back. So that's how I never pander to people. If people make a suggestion, they want to hear me talk about something, I'll usually make it if I find it interesting at all. But for the most part, I don't care if only 5 people listen. It's really a personal thing that I want to do for reasons that have nothing to do with viewership or money or an audience or anything like that.
Mhm. So do you record your videos, or is there some kind of record of any of your stuff? Because I suppose life is so precarious these days, particularly online, that people find their accounts deleted or something. But I'm sure you can easily just carry on and nobody would notice. Maybe.
I'm on my 5th YouTube channel, but I've kept an archive on Telegram of everything I've ever made over the last, I guess, coming up on 3 or 4 years now.
Mhm.
And I always tried to plug that as much as I can, and people have joined it. And so I think there's about 300 people that are signed up on that, or not signed up, but subscribed or whatever to that channel. And if I'll upload an audio there, even if I don't share it around to different groups that I'm in, you can see the little eyeball and it tells you how many like clicks, how many people have clicked play. And some of those videos, after a few months of sitting there, will have 300 or 400 plays on them, which is, to me, that's very good. Like, I can almost just sustain off of the Telegram
Mhm.
after a point, but it took years to get it to that point. So
Do people who know you know about your YouTube channel?
some people who were followers from like years ago, they don't automatically just rediscover me when I get canceled and I have to kind of like pick myself up again. So just the other
Mhm.
day, I remember a guy commented on something and he's like, "Oh, I thought you took a hiatus. Now I see you've had this new channel and it already has, like 10 or 20 videos on it." So
Mhm.
it's hard. Like, some people will just look for me if they find that my channel's gone, they'll just scour until they find the new one, and they pretty much just seamlessly resubscribe. But some people, even people that quite liked the content that I make, it'll still take a while for them, couple of months, if weeks, if not months, to sort of rediscover me when I get banned again. So how
Yes.
you have
So I
you've
noticed
never.
you have.
Sorry, go on.
Carry on.
No, go
I
on.
was just going to congratulate you on your marriage. You are now a
Well,
married man, aren't you?
I appreciate that. I will be this week, I believe, just like a paper thing, but I wouldn't have ever done it. I just I'm gonna take a trip to Asia in this next year in 2026, and it required me to have to do this because I don't want
Yes.
just like a straight up tourist visa where if you'll go to China, they pretty much will kick you out after a pretty short stay. I want to stay for like 4 to 6 months, which requires a lot more documentation, and they don't recognize like common law marriage whatsoever in China. So I had to
That's
get married in
wonderful.
order
We can
to.
look forward. We can look forward
Yeah,
to your streams from China, can't we?
I don't
Wow.
know what it'll be like, because I guess you can't access like YouTube or Telegram without a VPN, and I'm sure that's not a big deal to bypass, but hopefully I'll be able to stream from there. I don't want to like ruffle any feathers either. I got to be a little bit smart about it,
Yes, but your girlfriend, your fiance, she must know about your channel, mustn't she? Or where to
To an
find you?
extent, to an ex, to an ex. I don't think she's heard it, and
Oh,
if she did,
right.
like we'd have a lot to talk about, a lot
Yeah,
of my
because you do
infidelity
complain
and
about
stuff.
her a lot.
I complain about her a lot, and I confess to a lot of infidelity on there.
Mhm.
Admittedly, I've confessed to a lot of infidelity, but she'd probably think it was like gobbledygook. She would probably, even if I was like confessing something, she would probably just not even stick around long enough to hear it out. Like I go on so much at home. Who I am
Mhm.
online is who I am at home for the most part, and so people
Mhm.
just tune me out. That's why I'm forced
Yes,
to
yes, I
come
can
on here and
imagine
talk
that.
to
That,
you.
like, you're there saying your thing every day in the house, and they don't want to, seek you
I
out,
have that
especially if
like
you do it all the
very
time.
antisocial, like very abrasive personality where I'll take any mundane conversation and like shoehorn in some intense debate about euthanasia or something, and people just don't want to hear it. So it's like I'm very hard to tolerate at a
Mhm.
personal level. I recognize that about myself. Like I'm just very, very hard to tolerate, especially
Oh.
normies that have no interest in like philosophy or ethics.
Yes, yes. I suppose a lot of conversations for me is about how to shoehorn these, topics in, in places where where they don't belong, and people complain. They're like, no, no, this is a tea party. Why are you talking about this thing? You know. uh,
I can't help myself, but I do recognize like the futility and how annoying it is. If you have to, the way I look at it is if you have to kind of sneak in the conversation through some strategic back door or whatever, you're already talking to the wrong crowd in a way. Like, if I'm
mm,
speaking to you about something, you will have an interest in like most of these controversial topics that I want to broach. So I don't have to do any trickery to like get you to invest in a conversation that I want to have about ethics or about
yeah.
religion or social norms or whatever. You'll just
Mm.
kind of I just throw the topic out and you engage. But with these people, if you have to sneak your way around
Well,
and
like your
come in.
parents, right? I was listening to your most recent stream, and I can sense your frustration. And you were saying, not doing something is actually, a moral decision too. And that kind of reminded me of a story of a school friend of mine, which ended rather tragically for her. So she had a teenage son who decided that he would be happier masquerading as a member of the opposite sex. And she and her husband were supportive of him. And
Hmm.
but you know, the fact is that it ended in his suicide. And then
Oh, really?
this question just came to me, like, what what should one have done? So I was thinking, well, if it were me, I'd have said, don't you do it, kiddo. You'll be out on your own and disowned, and if you're going to do this in my in my home, well, you're not doing it in my home, kind of thing. And if you want to, and I think that might actually have a saving effect. In saying, well, don't do this, and if you want to do this, wait till you can live independently. But under my roof, you're not going to do this sort of thing. And and I thought, and supposing he also killed himself after I said that, and I was wondering, philosophically, how would you reconcile this? I mean, would you just, go along with the social workers and the, hormone therapy and whatever, or do you, stand your ground, and even if the same thing happened, because I guess you're going to get the blame, right? But then you also get the blame for going along with it.
Oh, there's so much to unpack there. I did want to get into that, like the whole, if you want to go there, like the whole suicide question and things like that. I thought, what might not come up until later in this discussion, but
Sorry.
I am, no, it's cool. I haven't been shy about coming out of the fact that I do support it in almost kind of like an Eastern vein. The idea of like honor suicide, and again, I don't want to compromise the channel. Like I do um
Well, it's not
understand that this
forbidden. It's not
topic does
forbidden in
set.
the Bible, right? It's not forbidden, and the Romans did not forbid it, and the Japanese didn't, but the Quran forbids it, and I think for a while in England, there was a suicide act, and I think that the whole idea was that. Your life isn't even yours. It's the monarch's. How dare you kill yourself? You could have been sent to fight some war, and you killed yourself. And you've made yourself useless to your monarch. Or if you believed in God, it's like your life is God's, and you're not to arrive at heaven or hell early. I think it's this idea of ownership that is about forbidding suicide, I suppose.
One thing I will like, maybe I'll kind of come at this in a sense from a bit of like a communal and a secular lens first before I get into the whole like religious permissiveness of again, I don't want to use the term and like compromise your channel, but um you libertarians may make arguments about like bodily autonomy and the right to like self ownership or whatever. I don't advocate for it in like a general sense, but I do think that the times we're living in are unprecedented in that, like, let's say when the Quran was written, or any of these ancient texts which speak like for or against said action, um we have like a useless eater crisis now that was made possible by certain forms of like material abundance and prosperity that they quite simply didn't have back then. And I think that everybody would have been able to somewhat integrate who was fortunate enough to survive to adulthood or whatever, because you did have a lot of like natural selective filters which pump the brakes on this like mass proliferation of bad genes and things like this. And again, you had a lot of norms, like social customs that prevented people from just frivolously having children for no reason. Like you would be very harshly judged, say, if you had a bastard child, right? Like And the way that I interpret the taboo or the stigma around bastard children was that it was like almost a suggestion that you're going to impose the cost onto the tribe. And if everybody behaved in such a manner, it would cause like an unsustainable social arrangement. Whereas nowadays, right, I have a child that's like a bastard, like we weren't married, right? But nobody really cares about that anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And it's because we have just so much, we think we can get away with anything. We think that we can like absorb any kind of burden or blight in this society because we've been so successful, like materially and otherwise. But we lost sight of the shore, I think, to an extent. So it's like now you do have people who they genuinely they bypassed all of the eugenic filters because of, great medical advancements and otherwise, organ transplants, blood transfusions, whatever. And also their parents were just basically low IQ dysgenics or whatever else their problem was, that medically ailed people, that because there was no social shaming, they were able to just frivolously have a kid and not care about it. And so I talk to these people who are like, they agree. They're like, my life is so pointless. There's not even they're not even qualified to really be a slave because it's not worth the food, everything that would require to house them.
Mm-hmm.
And they just exist in this in like a very pointless way. And I don't know how, these books are very old, not to be that guy, but it's like, how would ancient texts address something that I feel?
Slavery. I mean, I think it all came from the welfare state because the West is so wealthy. They had a welfare state, but that really was the beginning of the end. Because if you will pay people to stay at home, then they will stay at home if they're entitled to stay at home and claim benefit. And I think slavery was a kind of social. Um, it was a kind of welfare state, which said to the person who couldn't afford to, have a roof over his head or food in his belly, if you don't want to starve on the streets, if you're still capable of work, somebody will feed you and accommodate you if you're capable of some kind of work. I suppose that was the idea then. And or you'd sell yourself into slavery, or and I've been trying to explain to people, slavery was what made America great. All those, starving Irish peasants during the
Mm-hmm.
potato famine, well, they didn't have the money, they didn't have the savings to pay for their Atlantic crossing. And then I think they had to work for 10 years or something when they got to the other side. And then um, and then they could make their fortunes. And actually, in America, there was this idea that there was all this labor that were brought in to America who lowered the wages of the Americans already there, and they didn't want they didn't want that either. So I think immigration, even against other kinds of white people, was actually a problem then. But I suppose every age throws out its sort of new and unique evils that we feel kind of. I suppose we think it's unprecedented, don't we? We think it, would never
The,
experience such horrors, but actually, our ancestors lived through terrible wars and pestilence and famine, and we're still here, kind of thing.
yeah, like the two problems that I see with slavery as a solution, I concur with what you said. Like at this point, I would beg to be a slave. The problem is almost that I'm not, my services as a slave are not really needed. This is like, we've moved, in my opinion, more to a kind of a degrowth model of the economy where it's no longer predicated on growth for growth's sake. Um, economic expansion, infrastructural expansion. These things are no longer seen as like the yardstick by which to measure the success of a nation or an empire or anything. And it's like we were so good at creating material abundance through the Industrial Revolution, etc. It's that now we're trying to figure out how to like artificially resupply those filters that prevent things from getting out of control. Like, just for example, when I was very young, I already, we had like the Terry Fox run. Most non-Canadians don't know Terry Fox, but he was like this guy who's a very young man, and he had his leg amputated by cancer. And he tried to run across Canada from one side to the other on one leg, and he died halfway through. And it's the Marathon of Hope. Their goal was to end cancer. And even as a very young kid, I thought this was perplexing. I'm like, how can you end cancer? That's horrible. That's a horrible thing for humanity if you end cancer. You're going to have to just almost go around and shoot people in the head then. Like, people have to make room for others. By some way or another, like they have to, and even at, I just, before I got on this stream with you, I just came from the Santa parade, and one of the floats that came by was about organ donors, and these kids were holding up signs about, little Michael, 9 years old, he died, but his organs saved 8 people or 10 people or whatever. And I'm thinking like prima facie, this seems like a really good sentiment. Oh my God, one person saved 8 people. Wow. But I've come to see it when you zoom out the graph and you take a more kind of overhead view of the consequences and ramifications of this. It's like, I think that might be a bad thing in general. It's cool that we're able to do this. It's cool that we can give someone a blood transfusion or a heart transplant. But then what? Now we're left with this huge ethical burden of like, how do we say who lives and dies, who qualifies, who doesn't? Like, I call this like fighting the downhill battle against nature. The uphill battle was easy, right? You just figure out, okay, yeah, a bear can maul you like nothing, but it's stupid, right? You can sort of trap it. You can just trap its paw with basically a rat trap with spikes on it. It's an idiot. Like, that's the easy problem. The hard problem is like when you're have an absolute monopoly on like caretakership over the whole world and the environment and whatnot. Like, how do you actually manage the resources? How do you manage like human expectations and whatnot in that type of a scenario? And I think
there's a term called good husbandry in agriculture, and I think it's such a good word, in that you have these resources, you husband them, and this would draw attention to the role of the male.
Yeah, 100%.
And perhaps the assertion of male authority, but I suppose what men need to do is get it together to change the rules. Instead of complaining like women about their helplessness. I mean, surely that's the only solution. If you don't like the rules, then you'll have to change them one way or the other. And then it becomes a question of leadership and how we're going to change and who is going to do what and that kind of thing.
One of the problems I think with that is we're not in agreement about what we view as like what we value as a desirable end in the first place. So we're not even in a position to argue about the means at this point, right? Like, you and I might want something. We might have like a fundamentally differing utopic vision that's like we would need to kind of sort that out before meaningful
We want a fair
conversations.
society. We want just laws. I mean, we can, put it in a apple pie and motherhood way. We just want good government and low crime and low taxes and, you know, social and moral order and or maybe just the impression that our ruling classes are not mad or evil.
The problem is like the narrow or the narrowness or broadness by which you view, like, I think the consequences of moral action. And some people may lack the intelligence to make such like all encompassing considerations of this sort. So like I don't know, do you know Pentti Linkola? He was like an eco-fascist. He's pretty popular, or he used to be, in the dissident right.
Mhm.
But he conveyed this kind of lifeboat ethics, where he had an analogy about people crowding in a lifeboat, and there's too many. He said those who hate life will continue to pull more people into the boat, whereas those who love life will grab the ship's axe and sever the hands clinging to the side.
We should be
And
women and children first, right?
yes, but for practical reasons. I think that there's a very practical and an exclusively practical reason why you would um, favor those. I don't think it's like unconditional prioritization. So like we would tend to prioritize women and children in those situations because we have uh, a vested interest in the survival of our society, our race, or whatever it is, beyond our own personhood, beyond like our own death or whatever. But now we do live in a kind of a Hobbesian free for all where there's no point for me to really care about the child of another person, because society has sort of told me that I am not I'm a bit cast out, or I'm a bit I don't have much of a stake in it.
So the
Do you know
answer
what I
must
mean?
must be to give you a stake in
There's
society.
no
So
recognition. There's no recognition of me as like I have been dehumanized as
mm,
whatever kind of like victim label you want to put on me, because I'm white, or I'm a man, or whatever it is, right? It's not important, but like the 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 recognitive aspect of it is necessary for that to make sense. Like you have to recognize me as like a valued member of society. I exist within this society. We're both wanted, we're both valued, we're both recognized as
mhm.
participants. And now I want this thing to survive sort of beyond my own death. Whereas if you cast me out, right, you kind of kick me out of the garden or whatever, then I don't care about your child anymore. I don't. Like, I will just throw a child out of the boat to save my own skin. That's the kind of social climate that we have cultivated.
Yes, but I suppose in an orderly evacuation of a sinking ship, for example, there would be, women and children first, and then it's like, well, not the very old women, and then not the disabled children. It sort of gets weeded out, and if there's not enough space, it's only the children, sorry, only the women of childbearing age, and then you kind of get to the ones that you really need, and obviously the most virile men get to join the boat to help these women row the boat to wherever. Right. I mean,
Yeah,
I suppose that there's a kind of natural selection already taking place in this scenario.
being willing to sacrifice your space on the boat for another because you recognize them as being like a more valued member of said society or whatever, it requires a very cohesive um, and a very sort of like collectivistic sense of sociality that we've obviously lost. And you can't expect people to kind of honor like this one way. I do think that to have norms and customs like that, it does require like a deep sense of recognition, or like what Doolittle, he might talk about like reciprocity a lot and things like that. It has to be, you can't just tell me I'm a piece of shit incel and I don't matter and that I'm a historical oppressor and then ask me to give up the seat on the bus for the pregnant woman. It can't, it can't function like that. Do you know what I mean?
Yes, so we come to the question of the
You can't
role of.
vilify me and then ask me to sacrifice. Like it can't.
Hmm,
It's just not a fair or viable way to facilitate like
yes,
high what would they call like
or
pro-social
chivalry.
behaviors, chivalry,
Hmm,
pro-sociality and stuff like that.
yeah. But I think we are kind of in a state of flux. Nobody quite knows, what's happening. But really, if you want to reduce what people really want, it's like we want men to be like men and we want women to be like women. And this is really, and if just one of these groups would behave in the way that they're supposed to behave, then the other group will also fall into line. And if women started, doing their feminine thing again, the men will all, be all, masculine. And if men started being masculine rather than, complaining like women, but not doing anything about the politics of their country, then women might start to respect them again. But what I've noticed is that because of feminism and so many decades of indoctrination, men think like women, they talk like women, and you think you don't have to. Why are you talking like that? It just doesn't sit well. But then, I guess women don't, behave in that, feminine way, because we just don't know what we're supposed to do anymore to get, to fit in, to get what we want, and maybe we try a bit of both, and then we confuse ourselves.
Yeah, you can go back and forth all day about misogyny and misandry and whatnot. I'm a misanthrope probably in general. I recognize like men and women like, writ large, and most people in the world, they're basically just like beasts of impulse, and they're not, there's nothing going on between the ears or whatever. But I find it most helpful to somewhat demystify things like gender roles, for example, and like uh gender expectations and whatnot. It's not that men act as men because it's like in their essence, in some kind of like mystical or platonic sense, but because that's developed over time for practical reasons, which are elaborate, and it's very like time consuming to go in and list all of those reasons. So the way we basically bypass that is you have kind of like a rough and ready way that you envision that is simply like it's in the nature of a man to be this chivalrous, let's say, for example. It's just simply in his nature. They don't understand that there were all kind of like expectations, there were all kind of uh, practical considerations that led to the development of like male chivalrousness over time, or like female submissiveness and stuff like that. And when all of those contingencies are removed, it doesn't really make sense in this climate to be a masculine man per se. And I don't think that me adopting that as an individual would really set the record straight. Like I don't think
Oh no, I'm not saying you as an individual. I mean, what does masculinity mean anyway? It's not just sort of, having broad shoulders and a six pack and, bulging biceps. I think fundamentally it's about having principles that you defend as men, or you decide to defend the principle of men being men, for example, and then people will mean, well, what does that mean? And I think you will eventually have to go to religion to talk about patriarchal moral values, what that means. Um, no sex before marriage, no illegitimate offspring, and once we get that, once people get over the horror, like, do we really have to do that sort of thing again? People might just sort of see, well, there was a reason to all this sort of moral restraint of our ancestors, of no sex before marriage, and people being hard on you if you were seen to stray, or divorce, or not
I
look
think
after your children properly.
I think all of these things are all of the like religious customs, and they get kind of repackaged in a religious sense, but I'm able to find in them like deeply economic utilities that I don't think are just merely incidental, like the fact of no sex before marriage, right? Again, it's if you depart from that as a norm, as an expectation, then there's this fear that you're going to have, unwanted children out of lust, and there's going to be no husband around that's bound to you in order to like provide for them economically,
Mhm.
financially, things like this, right? Like you
Mm.
can't, looking at this as like a libertarian, for example, I would simply, and I'm not one, but in this sense, I would agree that like the market wherein sex before marriage was destigmatized didn't survive well. Like if put to the marketplace, it didn't survive as well. Period. Like it was a less
Yeah.
sustainable. But that's where the buck stops for me. I remember talking to some Eastern Orthodox Christians, and I don't know if this is true. The guy was Orthodox. I'll take his word for it. But he said that when they give marriage vows, it's very different than what they do in like Western Christianity or whatever. He said that when the Eastern Orthodox give their vows, the man says to the bride, the groom says, "I promise to serve you," and then she responds, "I promise to submit to you." And so
Mhm.
you understand like this relationship very differently. It's one between submission and servitude. So
Yeah.
rather than the slop that we say in our vows, it's like, "Oh, I promise to love you, I promise to care about you in sickness and health and blah blah blah." It's a lot more baseless sentimentalisms where there's something in the servitude and submission thing that I find is like much more um like I was blown away when he told me that. I really was.
Mm.
That's it, right? I don't have a religious bone in my body, but I
This
said
is what
that's
you
it.
want of your wife, that she submits to you, and
Conditionally though, conditionally. Like
yes.
it's
I
very
mean,
conditional.
you could tell. I mean, you could talk to a cat lady and say, "Look, you've got this pet. Imagine if it can talk." And it's always critical of you, of your friends, your tastes in clothes and furnishing, and whatever. And it makes its views about you clear. Would you put up with it, cat lady? And probably she wouldn't in the end. But
Hmm.
but, but I think, in terms of gender roles, it's simply this. If you want to put it very cynically, men are looking for a sex object, and women are looking for a meal ticket. And it would help if they loved each other, if only a little bit, to make these onerous demands on time and energy endurable, because otherwise the woman would be having sex with a man she loathed, and the man would be working his fingers to the bone to pay for the house, and all the other stuff. But I think fundamentally, women want men to do certain things for them, and I suppose it's their role to make men want to do these things, to continue to want to do these things. And men have to, I suppose, I
Mhm.
mean, they do regard women as a way of gaining status and progeny and, hope for the future and that kind of thing. But I don't you think it could be fixed if people just rearrange the furniture of their mind?
The problem with that, I have to say no. And there's a demographic question which I became aware of the import of some years ago, but there are more men than women, and it's not just because of like certain human interventions in these huge populous nations like China and India, but um, as I've come to understand it, there are more males just born than females in general, and so they used to be overrepresented in infant mortalities because females have endowed with a bit of a superior immune system, which is typically explained by their the greater importance of their role in in birth giving and like sustaining the population and things like that, right? They're less dispensable than males, so it would make sense probably that they have a bit better immune system and things like that. But now we've more or less overcome that. But what would happen is that it's okay if you have a surplus birth rate, like above replacement birth rate, because
Hmm.
you pretty much create you turn human reproduction into a bit of a pyramid scheme where you can mask these excess males if the population continually grows. And this is why we find it abnormal when a man is with a woman who's his elder, right? It's somewhat, we're like, oh, that's, even when people tell me like, oh, my mother's like 7 years older than my father, for some reason it always kind of stood out to me. I'm like, that's odd, and
Hmm.
now I understand why through looking at it this way, is that all of these excess males pretty much got absorbed like downwards. So there's always more people that are 20 than who are 25. There's always more people who are 1 years old than who are 10 years old, right?
Well, it
But
depends
when
on the birth rate.
exactly, it's all predicated on the birth rate and whether it's above or below replacement. And so when it's below replacement, um, you have, like, nowadays there's less people who are 20 than who are 30. Let's say in like a place like South Korea, I think their birth rate's exceptionally low, and it's like
Yeah, I
those.
think the average age is something like 40 now, which is
So
very
now
disturbing.
So now you have a situation where all of those like extra men who were always present, but it was masked by this pyramid scam dynamic. They no longer have anywhere to go, and they become like kind of politically dissident or whatever. And they can't do polyamory because of the way, just simply because of the way our reproductive organs are like anatomically structured. It doesn't work. Like you talked to I was watching your stream where you were discussing polygamy and whatnot, and like I'm all for that, but there are like physical restraints based on the physiology of like the womb, the penis, things like that, where you can have a lot of different social arrangements that may work, but some of them are necessarily like untenable, like polyamory. Two men can't really share a woman. Now, I was told that in certain situations, and like I think they're talking about like tribes in Africa where they pretty much convinced the people that multiple men could contribute to like the creation of one child, which obviously we know that not to be the case. Like even if she slept with 10 men and they all ejaculated inside her, only one of them is the father, right? But if you were able to convince like men, oh, you all kind of like, she's like 1/10 yours or whatever, then it may. And it was funny, a Jewish guy was the one like almost presenting this as a possible solution. If we could just dupe like the next generation of stupid people into believing that, then you may be able to kind of address this sex ratio imbalance by normalizing polyamory without having men feel like they were being cuckolded or anything like that. But for the most part, it's not really a workable. So
Yeah,
I this whole like arranging the furniture, just to answer your question, but
I was thinking of monogamy. That would be the most stable form of society. Then everybody who's capable of finding, one spouse. Let's start at a low number.
Mhm.
Can get on with that.
Like you have. I was having this argument with my wife actually last night, and she was talking about this guy she knew in China, and he's like, really nice guy or whatever. But I think he's a true cell. Like I think he's an incel, and the dowry there is like $100,000 just handed over. Let alone that you need a house. That's not included in the fact. You need a
Yeah, and you
house,
have to look
well,
after the wife's aging parents because
everything. Yeah.
the
It's going to
irony.
cost you $500,000 basically to not be an incel unless in China, unless you have some
Yeah,
kind of like familial like reputation or something like that, where people would. You're not a pleb. If you're just some pleb male with no strings to pull, you're looking at $350,000 pretty much just to be married to a woman who might not even like you. She might resent the fact that you're just a ball and chain. Like that's what.
mm,
And she was saying, oh no, he's a nice guy. Blah, blah. It doesn't matter. Do the math. There's whatever 50 million people, more men, 50 million more men than women under the age of like 35 in that country thereabouts. So what's the size of Ireland in total, right? You have whatever, right? Like many multiple times the size of the country of Ireland, just of like guys that are assured to be sexless and unmarried in that country. No matter,
I'm
I
gay
remember
now.
there is no answer except to, I don't even want to like Fed post or whatever. There is no answer because the math sort of assures that these guys are never going to get anything, no matter how, like, I remember Sigma Trialectic. He's had a good analogy. He's like, there's not enough cloth to cover the table. You
Well,
can
I
say
suppose they
this,
could
you
be
can say
sent to
that.
war. That would be, I guess if you have a youth
Like
problem.
1984, right? Like where you create a war just to like have, this thing going on and tell people that the war is always just the way it's always been or whatever. But
Yeah, well, you just say to them, this town ain't big enough for the both of us, and you're the one who has to go. Which I'm sure was what happened to
what
the
about
Vikings.
the question of like the precariousness of going into a large scale war though with the technology we have and with the ability to like stream and upload and document these atrocities and stuff now too.
Hmm. Well, I suppose people do get morally apathetic even about these atrocities because during the bombing of Gaza, I did scroll past a lot of the stuff, and I don't know. You just get fatigued by the compassion you're expected to feel, and people will just scroll past it and ignore it. Sadly, um, so. I don't know. But I suppose that the point is that they can't even send the extra men to war because they are the only children of their parents. You see, so I guess in the olden days when most Chinese parents had an heir and a spare, they might be able to lose a few sons but not now. So
Mhm.
they really did shoot themselves in the foot with Mao's one-child policy, and it'll take quite a lot to shift it now, because apparently most Chinese people they're either gay or don't want to marry,
Well,
or
I
if they
think
marry, they don't want to have children. So it seems to be a universal problem, or maybe it's a problem of the affluent society.
sure. One of the problems I think under Mao and that regime was that they were planning for a very different outcome of the Cold War and this kind of war between like American capitalism and communism, where it did, there was a very real possibility that communism won that, in many different timelines that would have been the case. And they had to very quickly kind of fundamentally redirect the Chinese economy towards something more like technological and open, very in very short order. They were, had certain things not gone the way they did, they would have been a communist nation predicated on agriculture, which would have necessitated a lot of children. And then very quickly, you don't need all of these people. They become useless eaters, not because anything intrinsic about those people changed, but simply the goal of the nation as a whole changed. And so they were deemed excess people. You had to have these one child policies come in, and in 3 decades, they pretty much prevented the births of 500 million people in short order. But
But don't you think that the one-child policy is in itself dysgenic, in the sense that suddenly this only child didn't have siblings to play with, didn't have cousins or aunts and uncles,
let me address this really quick, not to cut you off, but um, it's a great question. So now you have, to my understanding, there's this huge group of women that are in their 40s that are now wanting to have kids that they missed out on. They want that son they didn't get to have or whatever under the one child policy. Now that it's being lifted, they're going to pay exorbitant amounts of money to try to have a child at like 46 years old. You've completely missed what the whole point of doing that was. And in my opinion, it is dysgenic in a certain regard, is that you should have people sacrificing for the whole without, like, it should be just ingrained in the kind of cultural norms and whatnot. It shouldn't even necessarily be legislation. It shouldn't, like
it should
in the
be
West, in
understood. It used to be universally understood, didn't it?
yeah, people had to because there's a distance between like our consequences and our action, the people and their governments and stuff like this that didn't exist in like smaller, more localized groups in the past, right? This is like another thing that was only made possible post industrial revolution. And like in the West, we can't have a one child policy. Even we can't accommodate it because people are my freedoms, or you're infringing on my freedom. So what do? They poison us. We're being poisoned to death like a rat infestation, essentially. These women just get all this crap in the food and they bloat up. And we know what obesity does to the reproductive system. They all have PCOS. Their ovaries are cooked from the stuff in the food. And that's the alternative, right? Like they're just going to opt to poison us. But in the most humane thing would be if people understood the need for population control and somebody could actually just say, you know what, I'm kind of a moron. I probably shouldn't have kids, or I'm kind of, I don't have any real reason to reproduce my genes. I'm gonna opt out because like there's no rationale. For me to have children would just be a very selfish act. Um,
Or it's just a convenient excuse because of our culture environmentalism and basically being made to think that humans are blot on the landscape and Mother Earth would be better without so many of us around. But this causes labour problems, and then very drastic social changes such as immigration, and which upsets everyone. And I'm sure eventually it will be sorted out. But I think it shouldn't be that hard to control the population if you say, look, we want 3 children or 4 or 5, or maybe even more. I know people looking horrified now, and the thing is, you could say you're not going to get any contraception until you're deemed to have completed your family. You could do something like that,
I
couldn't
brought
you?
this up. I brought this up to when I did the Koraniyule some years ago, and I said, there is this woman. I was a truck driver, and every morning we had to do like this pre-trip inspection. So I would go outside and check, the air and the tires, they're not flat, etc. And there was a woman who every day at the exact same time would walk by the yard where I worked, and she would be taking her child to school. And she had dwarfism, like facial deformities, very short. And she had this child that was, mixed race. Like, she was a white woman herself, but her child was clearly mixed with blacks, and the child had the same facial deformities and dwarfism.
Hmm.
And I I have compassion. Like, I don't want to just be mean to these people or whatever, but I view this as a kind of act of terrorism of sorts. It's a demographic or genetic terrorism of sorts. Like, I don't want to pay into these programs. It makes me not want to work my job, because here I am, I'm
Hmm.
at work, right? And I had to slave away for not much money. And I'm thinking, I go to work to pay into these social programs so that people with no care about other people at all are basically going to just consume all of the capital we've accrued, consume all of the treasury,
Frivolously.
like frivolously. Yeah. Like, how can you, as uh, a deformed person, and
People will
we
have sex with
understand,
you. Men
we've
will have
mapped.
sex with women like that, but
Yeah,
they won't
men will,
marry them, right?
because men are disgusting. Men are
Mm.
fucking disgusting. Like, they understand that they're wired to basically abandon their standards, some more than others, right? Like,
Mm. It
I
has
will
a
abandon.
pulse.
And if for some, yeah, and it differs from person to person, but there
Mm.
are men that will just literally, if they can't get what they want, they just lower the bar. If they can't get what they want still, they lower the bar. If they get all the way to the bottom, then they remove the bar. And
Mm.
it's like, we can't, I don't want to be mean to anyone. I don't want to be cruel to anyone, but I view that, her having children, as an act of cruelty and
Irresponsibility.
irresponsibility. And
Mm.
it's like,
Well, I mean, the law could easily change and say it's a sexual offence to have offspring without a marriage license. It could so easily be done. Of course, the cultural reaction will be quite considerable, but it's easily said and could easily be done. But
I
only
didn't
if
even
we.
want to Claire, like Claire, when I seen that, every day I seen her walk by, I didn't even want to finish the rest of my day. I'm like, why am I even at work? Why don't I just lay flat? Like, this is fucking stupid. Pardon
So,
my
was
French,
she
but
a
I'm like, this is
colleague?
no, just people that lived up here by the school. And like, I would see a lot of Arabs and stuff. I worked in a very bad part of town, and I would see,
Mhm.
like, you know the Arab people pushing their children to the school who were like extremely crippled. They had, deformities, misshapen heads. They were in these sophisticated wheelchairs like Stephen Hawking. And I'm like,
Mm.
I don't want to be rude to anybody, but it's just like, comes back to the whole lifeboat thing. I'm like,
Yeah.
you're being rude to me because I want to go like full um ANCAP mode here. Like, I don't want to pay for anything now. I don't want any socialism. I don't want But I do believe in socialism, but socialism necessitates like extreme oversight of the kind of people that are able to gain access to these social welfare programs and stuff.
Yes, they were quite eugenic in Scandinavia because they sort of thought, well, if we're going to have a very generous welfare program, we have to make sure that, only the able-bodied, get to enjoy it. But I think that they're in trouble now too. Yes, there's certainly a lot of, distortions and, difficult attitudes to shift, not just in the West, but also in China, because we have created a culture of entitlement.
Yeah, and a very myopic, and it's like, well, as long as you're stimulating the economy, okay, but to what end? And people will say like, somebody in the comment here, they're saying, um, where was it? Give me 1 second. They said cousin marriage is allowed under Islam, and it's like
And the
the problem.
Bible.
Yeah, the problem isn't incest in general, right? It's more sophisticated than that. It's who's engaging in incestuous reproduction. Like incest is also the mechanism by way of which beauty and genius and all of these things, right? Domestication and like incest is like both the best and the worst of like reproductive combination. But we don't have to do any guesswork. We've successfully mapped the human genome. We know the results when two people, we can compute or quantify like what the result and the outcome will be when certain people get together to reproduce. It's not like
But it's
there's
like
really
dog
no.
breeding, isn't it?
Yeah, we've formalized it. There's really no mystery left. There's no ambiguity. Like we know that woman, we know the degree of heritability of her dwarfism. She just wanted to have kids for like whatever, or you know,
Hmm.
it's just it's an unsustainable thing, and that's why.
But that's what it will change. I like to think that, even as we see things get worse, in a way, it's a good thing because it's a form of accelerationism towards realization that things cannot continue as they have been. And I think we just have to say it as
Yeah,
social media influencers, right? I mean, uh, and you have with your way of storytelling, you going to China. I'm so looking forward to viewing your streams from China, and what you think of it. Um,
yeah,
and,
it'll be interesting. I've never left the Americas before, and
mhm.
I'm terrified of flying. By the way, like I'll do it, but I'm terrified of it, and I got to get on like a 30 hour. And I got to go up and down a bunch of times too, because I bought like poor people tickets with tons of layovers. So I got to like land and take off and land
Oh,
and take
you'll
off.
be so used to flying by the time you get to China,
Oh God. But
and you'll see so many airports.
I wanted to make a video where I propose an argument, but it's a little bit hard for me to make. I'm still kind of like thinking about how exactly to put the point across in a coherent way. But I think that when you when you look beyond what people are saying to the implications of what they're saying and the way that they engage with like counterfactuals, um, everybody is a eugenicist, even though they may, like with lip service alone, denounce and detest it. It's almost like how everybody is like a logician, right? Everybody assumes like when they're talking, even to say like, I think logic is like stupid, right? There's some logical basis that you would use to like make that conclusion, draw that conclusion. So it's sort of a same relationship with eugenics. And what spurred me to think about this was a friend of mine. He pointed out that um, the way that people deal with counterfactuals is very hypocritical when it comes to like eugenics and genetic health and things like that. And he gave an example. He said, imagine somebody had a child, and then you asked them, like, oh, wouldn't it be better if your child had Down syndrome? Like, assuming their child's totally healthy and normal. And you asked them, yeah, that's great and all, but like, wouldn't it be better if your child had Down syndrome? They would say, no, of course not. Like, that doesn't make any sense. But if the inverse, right? Somebody had a Down syndrome child and you asked them, oh, wouldn't it be better if they didn't? Wouldn't it be better if they didn't have these like medical problems or these deformities? Then they'll go on this, quasi like woo woo explanation about, the sentiment and everybody being special and blah, 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 blah. And so people don't really, they don't really treat like counterfacts regarding eugenics in like a biconditional way. They'll sort of but it's obvious that they don't have any defense for not treating them like biconditionally, so they'll just start going into this like diatribe about basically Gishgalop, like, oh, it's, everybody's special and I wouldn't change anything about little Jimmy. I don't care that he's a, Siamese twin or he's got 3 arms. Even secularists, like even people that wouldn't, an appeal to God may make more sense. You could say, God is infallible and he must have had a reason, but like it goes beyond that because irreligious people will still do this anyway.
Well, I think the concept of marriageability is actually eugenic. I mean, I've been having these conversations with Vincent Bruno, who I stream with regularly, and I dispute with him his idea of eugenic because okay, he's gay and he thinks to be eugenic is to be kind of sexually desirable, and I'm saying no, it's more than that. Somebody has to want to marry you, and you have to want to marry, because if you don't even want to marry, you're not marriageable, however attractive you are. And obviously,
Yeah.
even as a healthy person, you might not be marriageable if you have some, hereditary disease or a bad reputation for insanity or, criminality or whatever. So, if we just focus on, the concept of marriageability, then you can kind of maybe deal with the, we don't want to be mean to, people with disabilities kind of thing.
Eugenics is it's kind of teleologically neutral. It doesn't necessarily entail that there is some like normative how do I frame this? Eugenics simply means like the best is what is being intentionally selected for, but it doesn't necessarily tell you what the best is. A lot of people will equate it with things like good health, which pretty much is like via negativa, like meaning you don't have any ailments or you don't. They might equate it with like intelligence, but again, intelligence to what end? Like intelligence is instrumental. It's not it has no inherent value. It's instrumental. Like intelligence is good for something. It's not good simpliciter, right? And so people don't like, I think, for example, there's an aspect or an element of sex that is inherently dysgenic when you look at the way that the brain works when you're horny, right? And like the deprivation of blood to the neocortex and things like that, where you're able to make responsible decisions. This is the whole post-nut clarity thing, is that you've pretty much squeezed off the blood supply and you're an idiot when you're horny. And this is the state of mind that you're in when we do the single most important thing as a society is reproduce. you're an imbecile when you're doing that. So I think that it is fundamentally dysgenic. I think sex is dysgenic. I think in a certain respect, women are dysgenic because of men, in the sense that you said before, anything with a pulse, right? Men don't
Mm.
really men don't really hold the line against dysgenic women. They'll still, if they can't find something better, they'll just go down and down and down and down. And so it does kind of propagate like female dysgenics and stuff, whereas men are more heavily selected against by females than the inverse being true. So I do think that sex is dysgenic. I think women are dysgenic.
Mm. But I think that the male preference is also important. I mean, I think this particularly applies to um, Caucasians, because there is this idea. I think there's even this movie called Gentlemen Prefer Blondes, and it's like, okay, the man has an attractive woman, but for some reason he prefers a blonde to a brunette. Um, and I think the theory is that blonde is a color of childhood. Men actually want women to be childlike, and if they're
Yes.
intelligent, if they're very intelligent, their mother might say, you know, keep it under your hat. I know you're clever, but don't during courtship show off your intelligence, at his expense, because then he won't marry you, because he wouldn't want, a shrew nagging him and, always winning the argument. So you have to keep your
No, you're
intelligence
spot
under
on.
your,
I
yeah.
100% I would agree with that. I think, like, to a greater extent than people want to admit, what we equate with beauty is basically like the retention of pedophilic traits into adulthood for a number of reasons, which I think are, again, just practical. There's nothing like mythological or magic about it, but we we do tend to emphasize those traits as what we find um, aesthetically pleasing. One of them being blue eyes. That blue eyes is a neotenous trait because the melanin doesn't really begin to like express itself in the eye until later on. For a lot of like infants, after 6 months or a year or whatever, their eyes will darken and brown, their pigmentation and things like that. But
Hmm.
there's something else I wanted to mention, but I kind of lost my train of thought. But yeah, I
Yeah.
agree. It is pedomorphosis is pretty much like what we. Oh, I know what I was gonna say. So the other thing that it seems that we find attractive is we seem to be like coinophilic, and the same person who basically coined the phrase eugenics, Francis Galton, the cousin of Charles Darwin,
Hmm.
the super genius polymath. I think he was probably the smartest man that ever lived, and he also created the first um, means of synthesizing faces, facial composites. And what he also found was that people find norms and averages to be attractive. So if you were to take like 10 random people and create a facial composite of the 10 people, and then place that into a lineup amongst those 10 people as the 11th, and you have a double blind survey where you ask people to just pick out who they find most attractive from this lineup, they'll almost always choose that the composite face. And the reason, as it would be believed, is that like you almost have to look at beauty as like via negativa, where it's like beauty is a lack of like mutations and things like that. It's like a negative trait rather than a positive one. It's like your eyes aren't beautiful because they're blue. They're beautiful because they're not blue. in like a double negative, if that makes sense. Like,
I'm afraid I don't understand.
um, let's say you and I took our face and we overlapped them with like a computer imagery, like we made a composite, and
Well,
then
of both our faces, you mean?
of both our faces, right? Even though we're a
Mm-hmm.
different sex, like it would still probably, it would be like very androgenic, but people would still say, for the most part, that that face was like more attractive than either of ours.
I see.
And the idea behind this would be more or less that like what people are equating or reporting that they find attractive is like it is averageness, like extreme averageness, which means the lack of like deviation from or mutation, right? We might call this like
Mm-hmm.
mutations. Like it's very based around different factors like symmetry and ratios and things like that, which by by synthesizing two faces or more into a composite, you're basically minimizing deviations from those norms and averages. Like say, you're like, just for example, let's say your eyes were like a bit further apart than normal, and my like nose was a bit, whatever. It By combining these together and averaging them out, you would mitigate those mutations or deviations. And
Right. Are you saying that
I'm
the
saying that
children of
beauty
such a couple would have, but the offspring?
aesthetics are biological considerations that
Uh-huh.
get kind of truncated into something almost magical because we're not cognitively aware of the actual like underlying considerations that are going into what we find arousing or attracting or attractive rather.
Mm-hmm.
We're not even necessarily like consciously or cognitively aware of these things, but at a visual level, you do categorize these different faces, these different body types according to, like, let's just say um, geometric factors that
Mm-hmm.
are inextricably bound up with genetic health, which for the most part is an indicator of reproductive viability. And
Yes.
so you're making a reduction of aesthetics to biology and things like that, rather than having it stand in as its like own special domain of inquiry or something.
Right. I mean, I suppose I think we don't really have that much of a choice, in that, we can't just go to a shop and I want the one in green and large, and, we don't have this choice. It's like, well, whoever, who's taken an interest in us and whom we can bear to, spend any time with. And maybe it's just narrowed down to that, whoever we find attractive, who, seems to return, our feelings, and that is the most that we can hope for, really. We can't just, go into a shop and say we want the, small, medium, large one in, whatever color,
Mm-hmm.
we prefer. And but before I forget, I just want to return to the idea of the male preference again. About, basically, well, there was an expression called bimbos. Bimbos were very popular with wealthy men because they were blonde and they were stupid, and they were chosen because of their beauty and their dimness, and I think it's because men like to be admired, and like, oh, you're so clever. I could never do that. I'd hurt my nails, and, gosh, you're so clever. That kind of thing. And I suppose what men ideally want is, well, for her to be loyal, kind, but stupid, so he doesn't feel, intimidated, nagged, that kind of thing. But of course we never get, those things. But I guess if most men could make this preference, they
Mm-hmm.
probably would tick that box.
Yeah, I think too, one of the problems with men is that it's easier for them to have all of their utility get outsourced, whereas for women it's not, because their utility is embodied, right, with the role that, again, they play in reproduction. As not to keep coming back to that, but with men, like I made a video talking about the dog pill and
The
the idea,
dog pill?
the dog pill, yeah, which is like, not to get too crude or whatever, but some people do, in the kind of like communities I frequent online, they believe that to a larger extent than people would want to admit, that some women might be, engaging in like sexual acts with dogs.
Hmm.
And I think, it's not necessarily like substantiated in an irrefutable way, but there is a very weird culture, especially with white women, where, uh, and not to get
What,
into that too
single
much, but
single women?
single women, yeah, and all of the dog worship. Like I really,
Hmm.
that's the one thing I do agree with, like Islam very much, is they get the whole dog thing right. I do think it's kind of like haram to
Mm.
sleep around with dogs on the couch and stuff. Like it's just, but the point is more broad than that. Like obviously, dogs are very good protectors
Hmm.
and they're very good companions, and they don't judge. Like it doesn't matter if a girl weighs 300 pounds or whatever. The dog is not going to judge you. It loves you unconditionally. It protects you.
Hmm.
And if you swing that way, it's got a big package a lot of times, and they can to take
Hmm.
care of that too. And it's like the male role at that point, it's like, holy shit, a canine almost just did most of it. Literally, a canine almost did most of it. Whereas like I'm constantly reminded in my relationship that I'm not necessary. Like it's that there's no necessary action that I'm performing or service that I'm providing. And that's going to be the case for like most men. So when you
Mm.
have a bimbo, right, the idea is like, yeah, the man is, he's cleaning the pool, he's killing the spiders, whatever. He's like, she can't drive because she's an airhead. He drives her around. She can't work because that's, degrading to her. So like things like that, right? She's more kept.
Hmm.
Whereas when you have a woman just literally tell you, like my wife has, like, I could make more money than you. Like, so don't ever hold it over my head if you've given me like money. Otherwise, I'm going to go to work and like,
Yeah.
and you're not needed. You are not needed. Like,
Well, I suppose it's up
you're
to men
wanted
to
barely, but
change
you're
the
not needed at
economy,
all.
and the whole thing that, um, well, the equal pay thing, would have to go if, you know men will able to one day, earn a family wage. The idea that, a man can on his own provide for an entire family,
Yeah.
but that's impossible under equal pay. And this is something, government has to address if they're going to, even think of solving the problem. And once that is done, if men, easily earn more than women, women will fall into line, and they will find other ways of annoying you, I suppose.
Yeah. But again, right? How do you get from where we are to that? Like
You
anybody
have to
can take
say
a,
it. You have to say what you want. That's all there is. And obviously equal pay is, um, well, not fair. It's not even, allowing the market forces to
Mhm.
take their course, right? It's actually against market forces.
I want to be very careful about something here, and it's that I've brought up this analogy so many times. I've probably brought up this analogy 100 times, but you have to be very careful when you um, offer solutions or prescriptions to these problems, that you don't make the mistake of ignoring like tangible leverage and what kind of position people are like materially in to issue their demands. So there's this scene in Breaking Bad. I don't know how many people have seen it, but basically, Walter, he has this woman like Lydia, she's tied up in the basement or whatever, and he tells her, okay, she works at a chemical distribution place, and he more or less says, you're gonna get us this thing here so that we can continue cooking our meth, and we're not gonna kill you, right? And she goes, okay, I'll do that, but here's what I want. I want X, Y, Z, A, B, C. And he says, Lydia, do you understand the concept of leverage? And she goes, yeah. He says, you have none. So, because prior to this, in the show, she was in a different position, and she was able to kind of negotiate a deal. But as things changed, as everything like changed and altered, her only position now was that if you don't get us this thing, we're just going to kill you. Like, that's what it's come down to. It's, you're getting this, and that's like, you don't have any ability to give requests here, because, and I think that socially, like men and women, we're in this like situation where it's like, you could say, well,
I don't think you're that helpless because, well, you have a job. Lots of men do still work, but capable of organizing themselves or at least saying what they think would improve their lives, aren't
the
they?
last for the last 3 or 4 years I've worked, I don't even know how many jobs, 6 or 8 maybe, and not one of them would give me enough hours to even make up, say, 30-hour week, right? Like last night I worked I think a 3-hour and 45-minute shift, and it's fun, like it's an easy job or I wouldn't do it, but it's like a teenager job. It's barely a teenager job. It's like a job you do when you were like 14. And I'm doing this in my mid 30s, and it's like, I'm lucky to have that. Like, I'm like clinging to this like a life raft. I'm lucky to have.
Did you go to university?
Yeah, I did. Yeah.
And what was your degree in?
I had a BA in electrical engineering.
Why aren't you an electrical engineer?
I did electrical work for a period of time. I was doing residential work. I don't usually get into this like too much, but since you just asked, it's just the juice isn't worth the squeeze. The hours are extremely grueling, and I'm not opposed to hard work. Like, I'm not opposed to long days, physical taxing, and things like that. But you have people who are making threefold what you do. You're making pretty much, at least in Canada, you're making the same amount of money starting out as almost a McDonald's worker or like a librarian. You're being told to get up in these dangerous things. I'm being told to get up on ladders where, in order to reach what I had to work on, I had to literally stand on the very top of a pop out ladder. They would say, if you say I don't want to do it, this guy would say, "Oh, I'm more scared of heights than you, and I do it." And it's like, you can't argue back. Well, first of all, you earn 3 times what I do. You have a child, which I didn't. You have a house. You have a stake in this company. I know I'm not going to be working here 3 years from now, but my back will still be fucked up 3 years from now. They would tell you things like that. Sorry, somebody was just coming in, but they would tell you things like that. You were lucky to even be compensated for your labor, because you were receiving an education. They'd say,
"Oh, your apprenticeship."
Yeah, pretty much. And it's just like, it's not. It's pretty much like an exploitation or like an extortion racket for like intergenerational exploitation from boomers to millennials. Like, and even if you say, okay, I'll just go with it, I'll grit my teeth and bear it, they shit can you anyway after, the second there's any kind of a period where they don't have a contract or anything like that. They won't keep you on a payroll just to sort of like keep your allegiance. They'll just shit can you. Sorry, bud. No work, you're gone. Like
Mm-hmm.
there's no investment in you, and so there's no incentive to. And now with DEI, these companies just hire women because it's that their wages are literally subsidized by the government. So
Hmm.
like not to
Crazy.
complain or whatever, but that's the reality of
Mm.
you're pretty much just jester maxing if you like work as an electrician or you work as whatever else. You're pretty much just like a jester, if not a punching bag. It's like a humiliation ritual, more or less. So I'm just,
Hmm. Do you think it's worse in Canada than in America, or is it about the same?
it's worse in certain regards. Yeah, it would definitely be worse in certain regards. There's a lot more like oversight and kind of like overseeing bodies and things like that in Canada for sure.
Mhm, mhm,
A lot of the contracts, like most of the provincial government, are all people that are like crooked. Like all of the construction companies here are very crooked. They do very shoddy work, and there's very bad people that are the foremans on these job sites, like actual bad people. Um, they're all tied up. Canada's it's honestly much more corrupted than America
right.
politically, and a lot of that does show up in blue collar.
Mhm,
And again, you're building all these like shoddy houses for all these invaders that are going to come in and out earn you through no merit, no like. It's
mm,
a humiliation ritual that I just no longer wanted to partake in,
mhm. Do
and
you
I
think
don't
you
ever
could,
plan to.
do you think you could move to China?
Give me one moment. Sorry, I'm just
Okay,
going to step away for one moment. Sorry.
alrighty. So I'll read the chat. Thank you, cute dweeb, for saying I have a nice voice. Thank you all for coming. I don't usually get so many viewers, and Dismal has been an excellent guest. How long are these streams usually? Well, I tend to just let people talk until they get tired, dude. I'm still quite interested in what Dismal is saying, but yeah, it really depends. So fundamentally, I'm still quite interested, but the Dismal may be getting calls on his attention, maybe his.
No, I had somebody come in, and I kind of told them to like stay out of my office because I was going to be. I don't like people around, not just because of like them overhearing what I say, but just it's a distract. I get distracted very easily, and
Mhm,
somebody came down, so I just told them to like get out. But
right.
the joys of
Hmm.
living at
Yeah.
home with your parents and whatnot when you're pretty much middle aged, but um yeah, no, there's no, and at the same time too, I don't bring up like my credentials. I do have like a STEM degree, but the thing is that I'll be honest, it was a joke, right? I went through the school because the liberal government, which was in power at the time, they were offering basically free schooling
Mhm,
to anybody over a certain age, which I qualified for, and they cram these 4-year programs into basically two. They skip the summer and you just go right through. And 95% of the program was pageants, and so they
mhm,
bring things down to multiple choice with two of the five answers being blatantly absurd. Half of the class literally is illiterate when it comes to English. Things like this. It's not like I went to some Ivy League place and got an education. I didn't attend, I don't think, a single lecture after first term, and I would just
mhm,
kind of wander in and get a 70 or like it's not. I don't really value credentials at all. I value like autodidacticism, like people that
mhm,
are So I'm much more proud of like what I've studied myself than what I ever got like through an educational institution.
And do you consider yourself a philosopher?
Oh, that's maybe like a little bit pretentious to say. Like some people would find that very pretentious, and then other people are like too loose with the term, where they'll anybody who's like it's up for grabs if they just want to say they're everybody's a philosopher, pretty much. I don't know if I would say I'm a philosopher.
I mean, aren't you sort
I'm
of
extremely
developing your
well
own?
I'm extremely well read on the topic. That's all I'll
Mhm.
say.
But aren't you sort of wanting to develop your own philosophy?
I'd say I have. I'd say I sufficiently have. Um, and again, most of these ideas were just borrowed and reappropriated from much better men. I don't think I'm like particularly, brilliant in any sense of the term. Like I definitely just rely on people who are actually ingenious to,
Or perhaps
and
your
there's no
best
shame
work
in
is
that.
yet to
Yeah.
come.
What's that?
Perhaps your best work is yet to come.
I
You're
think
still a
I've
young man,
definitely
after all.
I think I've definitely innovated like certain ideas or certain put certain like novel spins on already existent ideas, but I don't want to be too pretentious. My views are they're no secret. There some of them are pretty extreme. Um I one of my biggest missions is to pretty much absolve the entire discipline of psychology and delegitimate it. And I think uh, a certain view in the philosophy of mind that I put across, the eliminative materialism. I pretty much argue for that. Uh, I argue for a lot of what Kurt has to say. I think he goes wrong in certain fundamental ways, but I think like pretty much 95% of what Kurt says I agree with, and I
Kurt,
even Kurt
uh,
Doolittle.
uh, Kurt Doolittle. Oh yes, I've interviewed him
Yeah,
um, before.
I agree with like the bulk of probably what he has to say, and
Mhm.
I don't know.
But
I find
what's wrong
I'm a
with
pragmatist.
psychology? I don't understand why you have a problem with the psychology. It's quite useful, isn't it?
I think that it's inherently abusive. I think that it can't not be just used as almost like a political bludgeon by whoever wants to wield it. Like the ideas of like like um normative psyche and things like that, and how it's like they claim it to be a scientifically derivable theory about what's typical, what's deviant, and things like that. And I don't think that it sufficiently like is rigorous enough um, to pass as a science.
Hmm.
I think that it's like eliminated materialists. I would argue that it's kind of a folk theory. It's
Right.
like a scientific precursor. It's almost akin to like how again we used to attribute like demonic possession to epileptic seizures and stuff. I think that it's the entire the entire framework of like folk psychology is something that is due to be phased out and supplanted by something a lot more scientifically robust and precise. I think
Hmm.
that it's a very archaic, and it's almost borders on superstition. I think psychology in general, even the idea of minds, right? Like even the idea that you possess this thing called a mind and it's substantive. I think that is like it's a very dubious concept. But it's very hard to argue for this because people think that to even begin to argue about it is a self-defeater, and you have to sort of explain to people why that may not be the case, and you have to walk them through this really long-winded process that it takes a lot of finesse to argue for this position, and it is a very, very unconventional one.
Have you heard of psychohistory?
I have not, no.
Oh, it's one of the ideas by Isaac Asimov, and I think, well, I mean, if psychology could ever, become a growth industry more than what it is now, it would be psychohistory. There's a nice Wikipedia entry on the subject, and it was his idea of predicting the future by just by the current events. I suppose a lot of historians and political commentators think they can do it already, but it's an imprecise science. And
people would say I'm like very pedantic, and like it's very easy to just call me like a kind of a pseudo or a pseudo intellectual or something, because I will even nitpick about, like, I don't think history is real. It's just it's too like narrative driven, right? The way that you kind of weight the importance of certain events and neglect, like it's sort of like historical atoms just are what they are, and then we try to construe them into like a meta narrative about like the telling of like a grand telling of history, or like a grand account. And I think it's always subject to scrutiny. It's like, why?
It's always been changed, which is why everyone's so confused, because every generation learns about history in a different way.
Well, it's obvious too, and Alfred Whitehead pointed this out, but he's like, any telling of history, for example, like let's say you have a telling of like Roman history from the Victorian period, right? It show both of them like are very apparently present, like, so you don't just get like this, philosophers talk about the view from nowhere. I would say, like, you never get this telling of history from nowhere. You get it. If I wrote a history book tomorrow, it would be a 2025 telling of X historical event or whatever. Like, you can't really, it's too influenced by like theories, presuppositions that you have, these like prior biases and stuff. Like, history is not a science. It's not, I don't even think it's like necessarily like a cognitive discipline. It's sort of an art form. It's an art. I would almost go as far as to say history is an art form rather than, it's just so narrative driven. It's not really truth act, I guess I would say. And people would say, that's an annoying take. But
I think you can almost deduce from the way history has been taught and presented, over the centuries, like, well, once upon a time, English school children were supposed to know the names of the kings and the royal houses, and now their knowledge of history doesn't seem to go back very far, and they don't learn it in chronological order, and it's the Nazis, like nothing ever happened apart from the Nazis, so they don't know about a whole bunch of stuff. It's really quite alarming, I think, because when I started to learn European history, I thought, gosh, it's really complicated, and you don't even have the language, as a schoolgirl at the time, to explain all these complicated ideas and treaties and reasons and whatever. And now I don't think they would be capable of even explaining these things or comprehending.
Another thing, I think it would probably like take us too far afield to go into this, but I'll just sort of touch on it. I have recently become very skeptical about the mainstay chronology, like very skeptical. I don't think that they maybe just got like a few things out of order. I think the whole thing might be bollocks. And I know he's a bit of a schizo. I don't know if you've heard of the writer Anatoly Fomenko, but I think there's a lot of merits to the work that he's put out. He's basically this Russian polymathic genius, and he said he was exploring a few things in astronomy and whatnot, and they come to the terms that like the chronology that we subscribe to and we naively take it to be more or less accurate. Like very few people would even think to question the timeline of events. But I think that basically he does a good job at proving that chronology, as we understand it, was like this invention of the Dark Ages, and a lot of it was very politically motivated. Scaliger's chronology is the one that we subscribe to, but it's not the only one that has ever been presented. A lot of radically different versions of chronology. Ours is based on a lot of like radiocarbon dating and things like that, which is a kind of dubious methodology for reasons that I probably am not qualified to go into in depth, but certain archaeological evidence that just completely confutes like the telling, like what's buried under Vesuvius, types of metal armors that just do not belong in that epoch whatsoever. And there's a lot of doppelgangers, a lot of people that were arguably invented by history, like Cicero and Plotinus and other. Like it gets into very schizo stuff. I know Isaac Newton had a radically drastic chronology he was working on at the end of his life, and chronological skepticism, I think, is going to be. It's in a certain sense, it's the most it's the most important science, and it's the most difficult to get right in principle, because you have to. It involves any discipline that you can get your hands on, whether it's like archaeology or semiology or ancient geography, map making, things like this. It's like there's so much that goes into it. Hermeneutics and interpreting ancient texts,
or even
like biblical scholarship. Biblical, like you can't even do chronology unless you're already like a biblical scholar, basically, because there was sort of like this interweaving of like history with religiosity and whatnot. We didn't even have chronology as a discipline up until like more or less Scaliger. And the thing is, before that, it was viewed as a discipline of mathematics, actually, because they had to understand the physics of the of space and like the constellations, the star maps and stuff. It was for the astronomer, the physicist. But now we've kind of taken it over as like the historian's business, which in and of itself was like a move that could be questioned, like probably a misstep in the development of this science, if you want to call it that.
Right. Well, we probably are getting a bit tired, perhaps. You've had a long day, haven't you, with your...
Yeah, I'm just caffeinated. I slept like 3 hours and then went to a Santa Claus parade. But we should do these more often. It's actually...
I know, I was just going to say, that there's so many topics we could be discussing.
I'd be down to, honestly, like, how often do you stream typically when you're not doing the Koraniyule?
Not that often, but then I'm on Spaces, but then I don't really have a routine. I guess when somebody asks me, when I have something to say,
I'd
you
probably
know.
be down if you were to do like a bi-weekly stream or whatever for an hour or two,
Oh yeah, that'll be fun.
once a month or once every 2 weeks, like
Yeah,
like whenever, right? You don't have
yeah,
to
yeah.
like
Well, when we,
write it in
there's
stone,
something.
but
Okay.
because yeah, there's so many things that we just like we can't really get to in a conversation. But I think
Which should be divided into topics, to.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, 100%.
Okay.
Yeah, I'd be down to do like a regular show. This is really enjoyable.
Great, great. Well, thank you very much for coming, and I wish you a happy Christmas and a happy New Year, and speak to you, well, before too long next year, I hope.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. This was great.
Okay.
All right, take care. Bye, player.
Bye. Bye, everyone.